As the clock winds down on Barack Obama's presidency, there was an air of now or never at the opening of the big Hanover Technical Trade Fair, meeting the leaders of Germany, Britain, Italy, France. Obama making his pitch for a free trade deal between the U.S. and Europe. It's win-win, he says, creating both wealth and jobs. But as time passes, opposition to the deal seems to be growing, as critics here fear a dumbing down of standards on everything from food to data protection. It's not just in Europe. Obama's former Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, now against the recent trade deal with Pacific nations. She's in a tough race for the White House against candidates from both sides of the aisle who fear outsourced jobs and unfair competition. It's all part of a broader subtext of increased protectionism and isolationism, a trend echoed on this side of the Atlantic, where Obama has spent the past couple of days arguing against a Brexit, for a strong EU, and perhaps poring over the first round of results from Austria's Sunday's presidential election, where the far right is in the lead for the first time since Hitler. Today in the France-WENTE debate, Obama's Europe. With us, Paris-based British journalist Alex Taylor. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you.
From Dallas, Texas, he's a former advisor to the U.S. State Department's Bureau of European Affairs. Tyson Barker, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you.
From Leicester in England, Margot Parker, UKIP, member of the European Parliament for the East Midlands. Thank you for joining us. And we welcome back Jakob Hessler, German entrepreneur who hangs his hat right here in Paris. The France-WENTE debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. It was the United States and its Marshall Plan that helped Western Europe rise up from the ashes of World War II. So there was definitely a sense that we could be at a turning point for the continent when President Obama spoke earlier in Hanover.
So I've come here today to the heart of Europe to say that the United States and the entire world needs a strong and prosperous and democratic and united Europe. Your accomplishment, more than 500 million people speaking 24 languages in 28 countries, 19 with a common currency, in one European Union, remains one of the greatest political and economic achievements of modern times.
Do you get a sense, Alex Taylor, that this could be sort of the swan song of the relationship between the U.S. and Europe as we've seen it up to now?
No, not at all. I think it's becoming stronger. There's current difficulties about TTIP, but I think if you listen to what Barack Obama just said, it's true that we don't often realize in Europe what we've done over the last 50 years. When you see what happened after the end of the Second World War, we've now, who would have thought 50 years on that we would have come together and formed this very strong union, which has a lot of problems, obviously, but then which part of the world doesn't have problems at the moment? I don't think it's a swan song at all. I think that relationships between Europe and the US are strong, and obviously it's incredibly hard to get a trade deal together, but we're heading there. We're heading in the right direction, and I think we'll probably have signed it by the end of the year.
But further to the point made by Obama, can you have a good trade deal if you don't have a united Europe?
Well, trade deals are exceptionally hard, but we've managed it in Europe. Europe is a huge market. That's why I think it would be absolutely crazy for my country to leave this market just because it doesn't agree with some of the rules of the market. But no, I think that obviously things are going to are difficult when you're talking about protectionism, when you're talking about different standards. But that's why we're having this conversation. What is the alternative? I think people who object to this, the TTIP, should ask themselves, what is the alternative? Protectionism. Do we really want that?
Tyson Barker, do you agree with Alex Taylor that it's not the end of an era?
Oh, I think that this was a continuation. This is a real bridge period. And I think Hillary Clinton has kind of demonstrated that same continuity. You know, her senior advisor on foreign policy came out yesterday saying that Hillary is for the UK remaining in the EU, and another advisor spoke publicly last week saying that that she is for TTIP. So I think we have a lot of continuity and consistency on the US side, but addressing this anxiety, the social anxiety on both sides of the Atlantic is a really important issue.
All right, that anxiety has been fueled with the continent waking up this Monday morning to the news that in Austria, the far right garnered 36% in the lead, the two mainstream parties out of the running for the May 22nd second round. This is the headline in daily newspaper Die Presse, the day Austria went blue. There you see blue as in the far-right Freedom Party of Norbert Hofer. And even if the post of president there is largely symbolic, his 36%, the fruit of an anti-refugee campaign.
I think it'll be possible to convince many to vote for me again in the second round. And I will say, as president, you have to be a president for all Austrians. But this does not mean I will abandon my values.
Jakob Hessler, is this the shape of things to come here in an EU that's becoming more and more fractious?
I'm not sure. I don't know. Austria is always a kind of a special animal, I would think, and it has had its own flavor of extreme right-wing populist leaders for quite some time. And so I'm not sure that it is...
But
it's not the landslide.
But the two mainstream parties not even making the second round.
Yes, but you have, look who's the second candidate. It's the Green candidate. So you can say we are witnessing in part, of course, a political transformation of the landscape. And that means that this is a very people-centric election. So you would have never thought that someone from the Green Party comes in second, whether you endorse it or not. So I don't think it's as bleak as it sounds. I think the vast majority of people in Europe are decent people who want things to be run well. And I think from time to time there's a little bit of stretch in the system, and then it tweaks and it eaches, but and it goes. It becomes a little hard, but we'll get through it. I think I'm profoundly an optimist, and I think that we'll get there.
Really, Alex Taylor. I mean, this is the way we describe all of these EU summits that we see. Every EU summit seems to be a crisis summit where they just kind of in the end muddle through, as the way Jakob was describing it.
But that's what politics is usually about, muddling through.
But here, come on, we're, in this case, we're looking at the far-right candidate who's got a good chance of getting the presidency, of then perhaps dissolving parliament, and saying that...
I think you have to remember
Austrian
that
president,
the coalition has been in power. It was a coalition between the right and the left. The centrist parties has actually been in power for 10 years. So often elections are about protesting, about getting rid of the team who's been there for a long time. So there's this huge coalition which was in power, and if you want to get rid of them or protest against them, there wasn't much else to go. In most elections, you have the right and the left, and you alternate. This was a große Koalition, and also this was exacerbated by obviously by the migration crisis, which once again is not a European crisis, but was kind of thrust upon Europe. So people didn't have many other places to go.
The parliament just like that. The president of Austria is similar to the president of Germany. From what I understand, maybe I got it wrong.
But he'd have a good case, wouldn't he? After all,
no. But
when you look at if he gets elected,
why does he have a case? No. Austria is a parliamentary democracy, which means the president, while being important, has a symbolic role. Now you can say it's a symbol that the president is chosen against the sort of conspiracy of the middle. But you can say Austria has, as you said, has been governed for 10 years by a sort of a very compromise-driven mix of left and right, the way the Austrians are quite good at. But the result is that at some point people feel that things don't move and that there's no alternative. So some people come and say, "Here, I have it," and then they go. But
I don't think people are stupid either. They know who they're voting for. They can make the difference between voting for a president like in France, who has an awful lot of power, and a president as in Austria, who doesn't have very much executive power at all. If he had a lot more executive power, I think a lot less Austrians would be voting for him. I think it's a statement. I think it's a protest. But I think that people are intelligent enough to know when they're voting for a president in a presidential system who has a lot of power, and a president like in the German system who's mainly a symbol. A little bit like the Queen of Britain.
Margot Parker in Leicester, do you agree?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch most of that. I just came in right at the very end.
Apologies
so
for the technical problems we had earlier with the link with Leicester. We're talking about the negotiation, the talk about this transatlantic trade deal with the U.S. happening the day that we're learning news that the far right in Austria garnered 36% of the vote in the first round of the presidential election. Is it anecdotal or is it significant?
Well, I think it probably is significant. I'm sure, the people probably are pretty fed up and they want to register some change. So good for them, fair enough. I mean, that's democracy. It's right that they have their say. Has it got anything to do with TTIP? I'm not so sure because I don't know how much has been sort of explained and how much is actually out there in the Austrian press. We've got quite a drama going on here about it because we have all sorts of groups and organisations that feel that TTIP threatens the National Health Service, which is something which is quite extraordinary and very important to British voters. We all use it, and it costs a great deal of money to keep it there. And so any risk, and people are simply saying, well, let's know a little bit more about TTIP.
Tyson Barker, what's your view of Europe when you see what's going on right now? The discussion about this free trade agreement, we've heard protests against. We haven't seen people rallying for it at this point. And we see a continent which is more and more divided, it seems.
Right. I think that, there is a consistency between the vote in Austria and the vote that we saw, or the debate around TTIP in Europe. And it's the idea of what you're against. Can you be against the EU, against the establishment, and against the United States all at the same time? In that way, TTIP is in many ways a trifecta. But the problem is that although these populists, the far right in Austria, and to some extent the Brexiters in the UK, are very good at edifying rhetoric and kind of characterizing a problem, their solution to it seems to be disproportionate to that problem. And one of the ways that they do characterize that problem is by spreading myths. So, for example, this idea that TTIP will have any effect on the National Health Service is a complete myth. This is part of the problem. People say that this is taking place behind closed doors. Cameron has been very clear that the National Health Service is not under threat through TTIP. Obama was very clear yesterday in Hanover that this will not lower standards. I have been involved in these processes behind closed doors, and I can tell you that we are committed on both sides of the Atlantic to raising standards in data protection, environment, labor, and product safety. So we need to start some myth busting here. Alex Taylor?
Well, I think that there are much bigger risks to the National Health Service in Britain than TTIP. I don't think TTIP has... I've been following the debate about Brexit. I watch it every day. I watch your
look at
competitors.
The junior doctors on strike. That's a problem for
absolutely.
the NHS.
There are far worse problems. I mean, if Britain is so stupid as to withdraw from the European Union and to vote to leave in the referendum in 2 months' time, I think it's going to have serious problems in the National Health Service due to the fact that an awful lot of the labour in the National Health Service is people who come from other European countries. My father was treated in the National Health Service, and he was treated almost exclusively by Polish and Romanian nurses who were prepared to do jobs for much less salary than the National Health Service can pay British people to do it, and they weren't prepared to do that kind of job. I think that's much more of a risk. I've never heard TTIP mentioned in a debate specifically about Brexit on British television over the last few months. Yeah, I don't think it's a big concern in the referendum.
TTIP is a big issue on NHS, so the argument goes, for the record, that it could happen that as part of the evolution of the NHS, some of the services that are today provided by government entities could be provided by private providers. And the worry is that should then a new government come and unwind that contract, and should the contract be awarded to an American service provider, that American service provider could invoke TTIP, and with TTIP actually seek an international arbitration on the indemnification it should receive, thereby making it harder for a future UK government to actually turn back the wheel on any privatization of a service. That being said,
the way you've
even
described it is that
but even today, but that is the argument. There's one error with the argument, though, which is. But there's one error with the argument, which is that if today you do privatize any service and you give let's say it's for 20 years, and then a government 5 years later says, I will revoke that license, whether that is an arbitration, international arbitration, or actually a high court, you can always sue the government because it is inappropriately revoking something in which you have invested.
Margot Parker?
Exactly.
Well, can I just say that I'd like to pick up the previous speaker about the skills coming in, the doctors, the nurses from Europe and elsewhere, by having a points-based system. So assume we Brexit, then, of course, we will be free to bring talented people in from all over, not just within the European Union. And by the way, with a point system, you bring in the skills that you need for the industries that you actually need to have those correct people in the country. So the NHS is no different. Doctors, nurses, clearly they're needed. There will be no problem. If you're needed, your skills are needed, you use the Australian points-based system. So that's a nonsense to say that all of those people in the NHS would collapse. It would not collapse. Jobs are there. They're always going to be there, and we will deal with it.
Could I just make the point that what you're saying, I can totally understand the point of what you're saying of this is the thing that's always advanced by UKIPers, that we have an Australian point system. But that does actually mean, I hope you realise, that us withdrawing from the biggest market in the world, the European Union, because as far as I know, everybody who's made a deal with the European Union, like Norway and Switzerland, has to accept free movement. So I don't see how we could be part of the European Union. They're going to be very tough negotiators if we leave the European Union. We're going to have to accept free movement both ways.
We're talking about trade. You don't have to be in a political union to trade.
Well,
Let's get that really right
the
out there.
European
You
Union
don't
has
have
not
to be in
been
a
keen
political union to trade.
to negotiate that. Countries outside the European Union, like Norway, has to accept free movement if it's part of the European trade area.
In fact, you could say, ironically...
we're talking about the United Kingdom. Well, listen...
The one that's going to the back of the queue, according to Obama.
Literally in the world. No, we're not going to the back of the queue. That's
well,
absolute
that's what
rubbish.
Obama, the president of the United States,
America
said.
managed to do a trade deal with Australia, and it took 10 or 12 months. It took 10 or 12 months.
20 million people against 500 million.
Complete rhetoric and rubbish.
Margot Parker?
No, it's not going to be quite like that. Look, they're selling us, let me tell you, they're selling us more than we sell them. Are you crazy? Do you think seriously that German cars are never going to be sold in England? Really? I don't think so. Listen, business is king. If you make a product that the world wants to buy, they'll buy it. It's called a free market. Very,
well, why is
very
it so hard to negotiate these deals? Why is it so hard to negotiate these deals? Why did it take... goodness knows how many years for Canada to negotiate a deal.
Let me tell you. Are you aware that we're doing 19.3% more business with the United States? We don't have a trade agreement with them. That's the United Kingdom. We're able to trade now. So I think everybody's getting terribly wound up about this. Seriously, it's a myth.
All right, we're going to pick up on that point when we come back. You're watching the False Van Get debate.